Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask could they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
It's me. I'm just leaving the courthouse. No, I'm not in trouble. But I call it a ride-along. I guess the judges call it a ride-along also. Just watching what she does as a judge, how she listens to cases, how she tries cases. And man, it's a lot to take in. And I'm trying to really understand all angles of the criminal justice system. The aspect of arrest, through the police. I'm trying to understand Department of Corrections. I'm trying to understand the role and probation. I'm trying to get out of the wind. Today, I'm just understanding the role the judges play. And I got to tell you, I saw that there are places where, of course, as a judge, she's got to be strong and stern and all of those things. But I also saw places where she exemplified warmth and concern. Now, these 4 Dane County judges went through our U.S. Black History course through our Justified Anger Initiative. 4 white judges went through a 9-week course, 2 hours on a Monday night. And she told me today, because we debriefed after her several court cases, and she said, Alex, I think about what I learned in that class every day. I think about what people have been through. I think about what they've experienced. Now, she's not saying she's soft and people aren't responsible. She's not saying that at all. But when a judge can say, I look at things differently, I try to understand things differently, that means a lot to me. It was interesting sitting up on the bench. It's a different perspective in that place. I've attended court with people in our church and family members, but it's different. She let me sit on the bench with her. The records were public records, so I could read through the cases. Almost all the cases involved black men. One involved a white woman. It's heartbreaking seeing men coming in with their jail fatigues and handcuffs on. And people were respectful. They were polite. They're saying yes, ma'am, to her, no, ma'am. Which shows me we can do this stuff before we get in trouble. I don't think there's anything magic about jail that makes you come to your right mind. Maybe there is. But they were polite. Like, you would look at these men and they don't look like they're rap sheets. So yeah, I'm trying to put it together because I know that we've got some stuff that's broken. So my work is tricky. Then another judge came in because he knew I was visiting, just to sit in on the last case and to have them honestly talk about what they take home, what they stress over, what they worry about, and how they really want to be a part of the solution. They really want to be a part of the solutions. And I got to admit, even though it's very eye-opening, I still feel a little heavy behind it. So I've got to process that. I'm still feeling a little heavy. You've got people who, for one reason or another, got into trouble, and then they're sitting here and other people are in charge of their lives. You have people who are giving witness and they're begging for their families' lives. It's draining. I need a drink. It's draining. We got to keep our people out of the courts. We got to keep them out of the system. We got to address this issue of over everything, policing and mass incarceration and people getting these crazy 10-year probation sentences, extended supervision. We got to work on that stuff. But it's just sad. It's just sad to see people fighting for their lives today. So we have to remind people. Take advantage of what you've got, education you have. Stay out of these courts. Stay out of these systems. Now listen, listen, I'm not trying to make people mad. And we know that we have systemic issues that are out here that's doing the most. But we just have to also remind our kids, you can't be caught up in this crap. You need to stay away from this because this system ain't nothing nice. You bump into a nice judge who's trying to understand you, but others are just, they don't see your background, they don't see the history, they don't understand systems, they just see you and you took somebody's purse, you stole somebody's car, and that's what they're going by. So let's keep our kids out of these systems. Let's keep voting people in who care about everybody and everybody's kids. And let's keep making this community a better place.
Sometimes you think that you as an individual really can't have an impact on a system. Today's guests are going to talk about their experiences as volunteers who I've helped to mobilize as they've become court observers, a way of really bringing some accountability to court proceedings to make sure that all people are treated fairly. But even with the court observers, I'm realizing that we can make a difference in how these systems work or how they're dismantled if we just believe that we can and we strategize together. So if you're feeling frustrated about any kind of system that you think is full of injustice, stop complaining and start strategizing and take some lessons from these sharp women who are going to be my guests today. First of all, I'm here with one of my colleagues, one of our vice presidents, Dr. Karen Reece. Karen, how are you doing this morning?
Great.
All right, it's great to have you here. And then we also have Mary, and we have Sandi, and we have Betsey, who are all part of our Court Observers program. So how are you doing today?
Good.
Doing well.
Good, thank you.
Okay, all right, good. First of all, I just want to say I'm really pleased with the work that you're doing in courts, that you're one of our court observers. We're going to get into what that really means. But let me just say to our listeners, one of the important things that we believe, one of the tenets, important tenets of our work and our work of bringing about systemic change is that we've got to mobilize individuals to act like allies. In fact, during our U.S. Black History course, Karen, we call the participants, it's now nearly 1,000 people that have gone through it, but we call them would-be allies.
That's right.
Because we don't want to just give people that gold star because they've gone through a training program, but we really want to help people to understand you've got to get off the sofa and you got to do something to bring about change, because it's not just enough to complain about it.
That's right.
And so we're going to talk about how some of these individuals, we have 3 women in the studio who we'll be talking about their roles in Dane County courts. And I think that that's really important. Karen and I have just been talking and working on these issues for probably almost a decade, but certainly 7-8 years. But we've talked about, Karen, this pathway that begins at apathy, when people just don't care about what's going on, to really being an ally. And they move through awareness, and then there's probably a period of anger where you think, I can't believe that these things take place. Then there's the adjustment. Well, how am I going to function in this crooked world? And while I'm just living my happy life, then that moves to a bit of angst that really rides through every level of your involvement. But this angst that things aren't right, and I used to be oblivious to certain activities, and now I see them, and that angst makes me realize something's got to happen. And I need to be part of that change. That leads to action, which is somewhat internal. That's your education and how you contribute. Becoming an advocate, where you really are speaking out to change external systems. And then an ally is all the above. Allies really all the above. And but we've just talked about using this alliteration of the letter A, about how we just move people to real action. And today we're talking about people who've done more than just have said, hey, this is really bad, but they really want to move into being allies. And it really begins with disruption. And this happens when you've had a paradigmic shift and you realize that you can't keep living in your own comfortable world, understanding that other deserving people don't have the same experiences. And so that sense of disruption gives you this sense of dis-ease, and you want or you need to do something to make things better. For me, it was being pulled over by the police in our church parking lot, and the American dream began to erode for me. And I thought that these things didn't happen unless you provoked it. And I realized that with no provocation, I was treated and profiled like a drug dealer, but that catapulted me into some level of action. That was my disruption. And at some point, our guests today experienced disruption. So we're going to get into the Court Observers program, how it all came about. But one of the things, just so you could be keeping this in mind, what was the point of disruption for you? And I'll ask that more specifically a little bit later, because it'll be easy for people just to listen to what you do in court, which is very interesting, but I also want them to know about the internal disruption. What was the aha moment for you? So Karen, before we start talking with our other guests, just tell me a little bit about how you came into interaction with them as we finished the history class, and we were encouraging people, you got to take the next steps to get involved. This is not just an academic exercise. You've got to do something.
So through the Justified Anger history class, one of the things that we try to impress upon people is that it's not enough just to sit there. We really want people to do something,
Right.
but we also let people know that, you know your skill set, your time availability. And so an individual is able to figure out what that action should be and what it needs to be. So we provide a lot of different training opportunities to kind of guide people down that path to figure out what that right thing is for them. We have a few different interest groups that are more in depth. So, all of the actions range from things like talking to your families and friends to doing a letter writing campaign to doing
Sure.
something like what we're talking about today, which is essentially developing a program that's going to run long term.
Sure.
So we had heard from some of our criminal justice allies, a judge in the Dane County Circuit Court, who mentioned to us that having people sitting in the courtroom during courtroom proceedings actually makes a difference in how the case proceeds through the court. That was an anecdotal piece of information, but given that information, we thought wanted to investigate how can we
Sure.
benefit, how can we make change in the criminal justice system by placing people in the courtroom.
Sure.
So in the initial stages of this project, we were looking towards a court advocacy program. And so that would involve, advocacy obviously implies deeper involvement
Exactly.
on each case or with individuals. And when this group convened, they self-determined that they didn't quite know enough yet about the criminal justice system or the court process to take that advocate role. So they decided that one of the ways to learn more about it is just to sit in the courtroom and observe. So that's essentially how this program got going. But one of the most exciting things just to mention is that this program was entirely created and designed by volunteers.
That's what I was going to interject.
Yes.
Because you and we've led the history course for 4 cohorts. So we've done this for 4 years now. But after each class, people will come to us and say, I want Black friends. I want to
Right.
know Black people. Introduce me to Black people. Give me something to do. And so what we really want to say to the podcast family, to the Black Like Me podcast family, is listen really closely that these women who are allies came up with what needed to happen. They assessed that they were not ready to be advocates, because that's a real deep dive. They didn't know
Right.
enough about criminal justice systems. But I think that that's what makes our work. I know that that's what makes our work really, really unique, because I think when that judge said you need to have people flanking individuals who are going to be in court, what comes to mind is let's get all your Black family members who you can. That's somewhat expected. But I don't think people expect non-relatives who are white to sit in court.
Right.
With someone, being of support to someone. So I love the fact that when we push individuals, you got to take action. And so we know that folks are listening to Black Like Me because they want to know how to be active. And it's just like what Jill Heron Scott said back, in the 60s, that the revolution will not be televised, that merely hashtagging and reposting is not going to change the systemic realities that we're now dealing with. People are going to have to get out of their comfort zones because they realize that this benefits everyone and it's not just a pity ploy. And so, Karen, who approached you? So we have 3 of our court observers. Do you remember who approached you? And just tell me a little bit about how we got to the training part, because folks
Sure.
realize that then I want to hear from the 3 of you.
So we put out a call to our email list for people who might be interested in getting involved in courtroom advocacy. And a handful of people replied, and we set up a meeting date. That's how it all got started. And so we had a group of about 6 people that got the conversation started. We have Betsey here today that was part of the very initial meeting for this process. And I made it clear at the beginning that my role was to be a coach. So we had a concept, we had a vision, and then I would serve as sort of a coach as they developed the process and developed the program. And so they got to work right away. And one of the first steps is gathering information and data to figure out if this vision is appropriate for what the need is out there. And they dug in, were very honest about the things that they needed to learn to be effective. And over time, the program came about. So,
well, let's get into
Yeah.
discussing the program. And so, Betsey, were you a part of the initial group?
Yes, I was.
So what was that like? So you obviously heard the call. Did criminal justice issues, does it hit close to home for you, or are you just miffed at the fact that we probably lead the country in the incarceration of black men? What was it that really prompted you to want to get involved in this element or aspect of allyship?
Well, I think the criminal justice issues, yes, have been some of the most eye-opening for me in my journey. So yes, that was what I was interested in. And it was actually you that made the call, Dr. G. I dug out my notes, and it was exactly 2 years ago. Exactly 2 years ago today, you held a Next Steps meeting, which you are still doing.
Right. And so Next Steps is something. It's helping folks who've gone through our history class to say, all right, you've now been informed. Let's help you become transformed. Let's get you involved some way. So we have this session, and you were at that.
Yes, and I actually cheated because I had not yet taken the history class. I was on the list.
That sounds like white privilege, doesn't it, Karen?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
It's okay. So tell me some more. So you came to that next step.
So you had like 3 issues. You had this book collection for Meadowood. You had advocacy for people of color attending hearings and court proceedings, and you had an essentials pantry. Yeah. And so you introduced those ideas to everybody, and you said, okay, now self-select, go in these corners, and you're going to talk about it. So we went in these corners, and I totally made a beeline for the criminal justice one and said, this is where I want to try to make some change. And then it was about just saying, okay, so we're not going to do any of this. Justified Anger is not going to do any of this. You guys are going to do this. So who's going to take up the leadership? And you gave a framework. And what is the fellow's name? Harry gave a framework for how you would suggest us to do the organizing. And so we sat there and sort of followed the framework. And then it was summertime, and we were all going on vacations, and finally got a meeting, I think, in October of 2017. And had this group of people that had signed up that night and got going. And we had the help of Karen, which was great because she really gave us a nice framework for thinking through and organizing.
So did Karen talk to you about like the history of the criminal justice system?
We had all sort of taken that.
Okay.
Her course before, but it was more the organizational aspects of how to think through a new program. And that was really instructive and very, very helpful for us.
I love that. So again, I just have to stress, over the years, people have just asked me to tell them what to do. Or I've talked with white individuals who are afraid of doing something wrong. And so they've become just somewhat stuck. And so when I found out that this group was meeting, getting some training, and was actually starting to go to court and observe, because at some point you all made the decision that we're going to be court observers, that we're not ready to be advocates, but we'll sit in on court. And we'll be able to take notes. And so, Karen, I think it was you or the team. Somehow you created a form so that everyone was observing and making notes on the same things so that there'd be somewhat of some consistency.
Yeah, I might have suggested if we're going to sit in there, it'd be great to collect some data. But
as a true researcher, Karen, we cannot. Right, just like a photographer cannot miss a photographic moment. Karen will not miss a research moment.
Sure won't.
No, it makes sense.
But the form was entirely designed by the team, and I gave some input here and there.
That's great to stress.
They created it all.
Oh man, that's really great. So Mary, Sandi, where'd you come into the picture? So Betsey cheated and came to the event 2 years ago, and was intrigued by one of those areas. How did you get to that part? And then I'm going to jump right into your court experiences, and you can just get close up on the mic.
Yep. Okay. So I also cheated.
We're gonna have to have a better system of really accepting people to the next step.
Well, you're, yeah, it's part of the social media strategy, though.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. Touche.
So I worked in college. I worked at a place with people experiencing homelessness in Chicago, and right out of college, I moved to Baltimore and worked on a program with kids who were on probation or who were coming out of incarceration.
Sure.
And had really loved that work and gotten to know and gotten to see, like, people involved in the system are not that different from anybody else. And so it's just always kind of been something in the back of my interest area and stuff. And then in the couple of years, particularly leading up to and after the election, had started to kind of do a deep dive and figure out where I wanted my interests to be. I'd been a CASA volunteer with foster children for a long time and was kind of ready for something a little different. And in December of 2017, I had found the Black History course, but it was either sold out already for the year or whatever it was. But I was on the mailing list, and then I got an email that gave an update about those 3 programs.
Oh.
And it said there's still room in the court advocacy program if anybody's interested. And I thought that's exactly the kind of opportunity that I wanted to get involved in. So I emailed Karen, and she said, well, our next meeting is tonight. I said, all right, I can come. So that was how I found the program. And I have since taken the class.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. That's great.
So
Betsey.
have I.
Okay, Betsey. All right. I didn't want to kick you out of the studio. Mary, did you take the class?
Yes, I did.
Thank you, Mary.
I did. I've been through all 4 of them. I facilitated for the last 3. I'm there.
So how did you get connected with court advocacy?
So how I got connected is I was at the meeting that Betsey referred to, the Next Steps meeting. Very grateful for the Next Steps meeting. The class took the top of my head off. And one of the disruptive moments for me was about halfway through. We broke into our small group, and there's a elderly white gentleman and I sitting next to each other, and we looked at each other and we said, we live in a white supremacist country. Hadn't occurred to me. Hadn't occurred to him. It was like, it rocked.
Wow.
Rocked me. So, Next Steps, went to that meeting, and I was interested in all of it. I was willing to do anything. I just wanted to begin to show up. I knew that was what I'd lived pretty quiet. I'm pounding on the table, sorry.
No, you're passionate. You're passionate.
I had lived pretty small. I was moved to Madison when my daughter was 8, was raising her. And when I heard about the Race to Equity report, which was a year after it came out, I was like, this happened on my watch.
And this is a report that was put out that talked about the racial disparities in Madison and Dane County,
Wisconsin. And it was devastating. And I wasn't living it. I was living in my little bubble and moving around quite safely and conveniently. And so I knew that I needed to step up and step out. And your lovely organizations, Nehemiah, Fountain of Life, Justified Anger, gave me the opportunity to step up and step out. And so I wanted to do I first did the Essentials Drive with Harry, got in on the tail end of the book drive when the Essentials Drive was done, and then bumped from that into the court advocacy. And Sandi and Betsey were already in there. They were coming up with the form.
Sure.
So a lot of the research part I was not part of, but got the form and we started going to court, and the rest is why we're here today.
You know, I love the fact that you pointed out your moment of disruption, because I think what's got us in such a stalemate when it comes to race relations is the apathy that's either due to the lack of information or fear. What I found in Madison is that actually that people are not as apathetic as I thought they were. They were just unaware of what was going on. As you mentioned, moving here with your daughter at 8 years old, and you're realizing we're living in this white supremacist country, which you could not have used that phrase 10 years ago.
No,
that would get you beat up
right.
in liberal places like Madison. You were about to say something, Sandi?
I just wanted to add that I think that that's true of many people, but there may also be people like me who was aware for a long time. I studied sociology in college.
Sure,
I knew I'd had various experiences, but it wasn't until sometime in the last few years, just with the heightened levels of everything, that I realized, wait a minute, I can believe something, and that's not enough. Like, I can't walk around just thinking, I'm fine because I believe all the right thing, quote unquote, right things. You have to actually do something.
You have to do.
You can't just,
You gotta show up.
Karen, no, you're right. Dr. Reece, you can attest to this. You and I and our organization has been challenged a little bit over the years because the assumption is if we're going to address issues of race, we've got to continue to focus on people of color, specifically Black people, as if a program could right or wrong or all the wrongs, but it also means that somehow something's wrong with that individual and there's no systemic participation in that reality. And so we're listening to folks who, or we've been asked, why aren't you working with the staunch white supremacist, tiki torch carrying kinds of folks? To which I always say they need an exorcist or a psychiatrist, but that's not my work. I mean, I don't want to be in verbal combat with those individuals. But there are folks who consider themselves, who are kind people and aware people, but may not have ever felt invited or been given the space to be trained and affirmed to do this kind of work. And so I'm really wanting to reiterate this so that people who are listening will understand the responsibility is yours. You know, someone can't just come and pull you off the bench and say, hey, come and get in the game. You've got to realize, these ladies are not lawyers. This is not their background. They're not even necessarily community organizers, but they're realizing that we've got to have influence in our spheres of influence if we're going to really help make this world more equitable.
Right. And there's something to be said for taking the initiative to be involved in something and then being part of creating it and carrying it out versus, getting a list of volunteer opportunities. Nothing wrong with that. We have things that need to be done and we need those. But that gives some people an out. So basically, I'm checking a box there. I did something. I contributed, but that's not affecting systems. That's not changing.
This is about
the
systemic
white supremacy
change.
Systems that exist in our country, and that's what justified anger. That's really what the point of it is to impact these systems and structures.
And you have, our team has given individuals the space to participate in creating the assessment sheets, the opportunity to say what kind of training they need. Because again, I just want to highlight that because I think we can make greater change in society if people just step up and say, I'm smart. I know how to put this together. I'm compact. Let me do something. You don't have to wait for a black nod or for somebody to come and give you permission to do it. You see what's broken. You know what's going on and you can step up to it.
And there's enough to be done in our white circles, in our systems, which were created by white people.
Come on now, sister.
So, there's enough for white people to do with other white people that will make a big impact.
Exactly. Can any of you, oh, yes, please, you want to say something, Mary?
Your spheres of influence, I've thought about this coming into this because I wanted to be able to speak to people like me.
Sure.
And because I felt like my sphere of influence was very tiny. I didn't belong to a church. I, had my little enclave of moms, and that was my sphere of influence. So I didn't think of it in terms of who can I influence. And that said, and I was, my daughter is Hapa. So I was in an interracial relationship for 20 years. You can't be in an interracial relationship and not have some sense of stuff going on. But regardless, I lived small. And when I first heard you say, which was around the time of that meeting, talk about spheres of influence, and I had felt like the racial disparities had happened on my watch, and you said something about, well, can we have the will to change this on our watch? And I was like, okay. And what I want to say and who I want to speak to is the white folk out there who feel like, oh, but I couldn't make a difference. I think the right things and I'm not racist, but I can't really make a difference. I watched people go through 4 classes now, and what I want to say to them at the end of each class is just keep showing up. there's work to be done there's enough work for everybody.
Right.
Just keep showing up. So
no, that's good. Talk to me about when you went to court to observe for the very first time. So someone tell me what kinds of things are on the assessment form that you just spit it out, or
I should have brought one of those forms and had it in front of me. But the form actually came from when we were doing our research. There were no programs out there that concentrated on the defendant in court. It was only victim related. Mm-hmm. So we actually used a form that people used with victim support programs and adapted it for use in our program. And really, it's no different. They're just another person in the court system, and all the same factors are in play. So some of the issues are, what were the offenses? Who are the players? Who's the judge? Who's the who are the attorneys? Mm-hmm. Is there a public defender involved, or is there not? What are some of the others?
There's a bunch of demographic info that we gather when we can. We try to be careful about assumptions and things. There is information about what the outcome was and whether the outcome matches. Often the prosecutor and defense attorney will have come to an agreement beforehand with a recommendation for what a sentence will be, or a plea deal, whether the judge goes with that or not. And then we try to capture, and this part's a little bit trickier, but some more observations that people have about what the demeanor is and the interactions between people in the courtroom. So how are people treated, and what are those interactions like?
Were you nervous, Sandi, the first time you went into a court to do this? And were you the only court observer in your first court experience, or were you with one or two other justified anger observers?
I think I went by myself the first time, and this is before we had the form. So initially, like we said, we started going just to kind of understand. Mm-hmm. And I was nervous in whether people would question why I was there, or would anybody, give you a hard time. They shouldn't. I mean, it's a public process. We are allowed to be there as a citizen, as residents. And
were you asked by anyone, by the bailiff or the judge or anyone, who you were, or who?
So there's two different types. The very first time I went to initial appearance court, which is where people, where they get arrested and they're held or whatever. And it's the first time they go before a judge, within 24 hours or so of when they go in. And that time we were asked there, but I think that was actually the intention was for the bailiff wanted to know if people had someone there, and they actually were trying to bring them up quicker and they'd move them up in the line. In the regular courtrooms, they don't usually, the bailiffs, they don't ask normally. Mm-hmm. Now, that's changed a little.
And so do you think you look more official when you come in with a form? I assume you have a clipboard or something you write on. Has it felt different in court when you've shown up with something that you're filling out, or that you're taking notes? Do people think you're a reporter or something?
I think we get noticed more. And if we're not asked beforehand, the judge will often, I've had the experience of the judge often asking afterwards
who you are,
who are we, and
what you're doing there,
and what we're doing. Not quite so. I mean, it's more like, oh, are you from Nehemiah?
I love that.
Oh yeah.
It started with, are you from a law school? Are you here observing as a law student? Once you're there for more than one hearing, they recognize it. They're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And now it's changed to, are you from?
Wow.
Hey everybody, we hope you've been enjoying this episode so far. My name's Tyler Nyland. I am the podcast manager for Black Like Me, and I wanted to let you know about an opportunity that you have if you've been looking to really gain better access and hear more about what we're doing with Black Like Me. We have an opportunity called Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/blacklikeMe, you can find our page where we offer a lot of different opportunities for you to get involved or to join us in this work. So if you go on there, you'll see a bunch of different tiers that you can join, where you can become financial supporters. And with each different tier, you get an opportunity to receive different benefits from us, such as you might be a part of one where you get your name shouted on a podcast, you get a specific thank you. You might be able to join an exclusive Facebook group where you're able to process through different issues together. And then for a certain level, you even could get Dr. G to come out and fly out to you to have a meal. If you're a business, he might be able to do a whole day of consulting for you. So if you would go to patreon.com/blacklikeme, you can check out all the different tiers and options that we are able to give you. And you can really just support the mission of what we do here at Black Like Me. So we want to thank you for being a listener. That's awesome. Please go to patreon.com/blacklikeme. If you have any other questions, go to alexg.com/contact to fill out the form for a Black Like Me insurance. Now back to the episode.
So I have a question here that I want to ask each of you just to take a moment to answer. What has shaken you the most? What you have observed in court, or your own oblivion to the injustices within our criminal justice system that's just going on during your watch? What's been most jarring for you in this experience? And Betsey, I'm gonna put you on the spot to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been observing and studying and learning about the criminal injustice process for a long time. So I already was blown away by a lot of things, like the whole lifetime of having to wear an ankle bracelet and all those things. But I think in actually going in and observing, started with the initial appearance, how quickly that goes and how it's just, one person after the next, and okay, we're making these decisions about bail, like right off the bat, and provisions of initial bail. But then observing, I think it's the attitude of the judges when you see them lecturing, or when you see them sort of going beyond what really needs to be said about an issue. It was interesting to see that.
Now, did the judges do that indiscriminately, or are you saying that you've observed that it happened with more groups, with certain groups more than others?
Certain ones, yes.
Okay. Well, you can be specific. This is my podcast, so we don't have to worry about judges getting mad. People of color, black people, who got lectured the most?
Yeah,
lectured differently.
The one thing that really blew me away was the time when one of the judges one of the defendants had said, well, I only knew that I had this warrant because my boyfriend had called to see if he had a warrant against him. And I said, well, let me get on the phone too, and I'll find that out. And so the judge was making fun of that and saying, oh, you just happen to call and find out if you have a warrant. But yes, that's the way it goes, because it's very hard to know when you have a warrant out against you. And it can be all kinds of little things. And it's actually very responsible of her to have done so, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. But you felt that the judge was somewhat flippant.
Oh, very much so.
Sandy and Mary, how about you? Were there any real aha moments? I mean, you went into this level of volunteerism, or you were mobilized into these areas because you have some interest in wanting to help to dismantle something that's probably unjust. But were there things you observed that just either were heart-wrenching or made you realize, okay, I knew that there was injustice, but I didn't think it would be this blatant, or I didn't expect to see it like this? Were there things that you looked at that just that surprised you and made you say, this is why we're doing this?
I think that for me, I've been most, I guess maybe in some ways, overwhelmed by how complex this is, and how it is it is really hard to find the patterns. So we know the numbers. We know that this is disproportionate. We know it's that it's not that Black people commit more crimes. Like, we know the numbers, and it's hard to trace.
Wait, you just said Black people are not committing more crimes.
Right.
Because that is the assumption.
Right.
That Black people are in this system
Correct.
because they're committing more crimes.
Right. And so we know that's not the case, but it's really hard to trace all the different layers. Everything is compounded along the way. And so it's not often that I've seen what I felt were super blatant examples, but there are definitely some. Often it's in the recommendations from the prosecutor's office of how long sentences should be, where I see, and discussions of, or concern about whether somebody how high they're going to set bail, over their risk to society, safety, and blah blah blah. That those are the things that to me have stuck out the most. Is the feeding into a narrative of public safety, that tough on crime is what what needs to happen, and that's the only way to address these issues.
Right. So Karen, let me just ask you, as a team, as a colleague, but also as a researcher, what pushes the perception that Black people are just, I don't know, genetically more criminal? Because I really appreciate what Sandi says, and I've seen the stats. I know that it's true, but how do we have a narrative that allows America to think that Black people are just more criminal by nature than their white counterparts?
Yeah, so like we learned in the history class, this started with the formation of our country and finding a way to manage who was a slave and wasn't a slave. We learned that there was a law in the books in the 17th century or 18th century that basically gave white people the mandate that if they see a person of color, a non-white person on the streets after 9 o'clock, it was their job to make sure they were out there for legitimate business, and if not, call the police. So that started a long time ago.
And white people took advantage of that power that was handed them.
Absolutely, and it created a generations long narrative of believing this is not something we have to state over again. It's something that we see every day. The other thing that causes this to happen is we tend to see heavier policing in certain neighborhoods. So the way Madison is laid out, and many cities are laid out, there's a big disparity in poverty. So there's a large number of Black people and other non-white people living in low-income housing or apartments, and those areas are heavily policed. So if someone is, let's say, smoking marijuana in a heavily policed area versus the suburbs, they're much more likely to be caught and arrested for the same offense.
And so those neighborhoods are more heavily policed, although we know that there are probably more calls to State Street, which is part of our downtown, than these areas. But yet these other areas, highly impoverished areas, are more heavily policed.
Right. And so that's one of the major factors for the arrest disparity. So why we see Black people arrested more often. When we do, sociological surveys about behavior, we don't see any differences in terms of the crimes committed, but we see Black people being arrested for the same crimes at a much higher rate. And in a large part of that is due to policing practices.
And so it makes it very easy for society to connect the dots that Black people must be committing more crimes and more dangerous.
Make a false connection.
Right. Make the false connection. That's true. Because there are community alternatives for white counterparts that aren't necessarily offered to Black defendants, or they're not aware of it, or just they can afford certain legal counsel that will help them get through the system.
And just to say it out loud, not only are Black people arrested at a higher rate, but it compounds at every level of the system. So the disparity gets greater. Black people are more likely to be found guilty, more likely to be sentenced to imprisonment or jail over probation, and more likely to get longer sentences. So at each level of the system, it gets worse. And that's also something that white America sees and makes the false connection that it must be because Black people are dangerous.
Wow. And Wisconsin is in a very interesting place. I mean, we noticed this in the last election, and it's already being forecast for the upcoming election in 2020, that we're a major swing state, that we're a major contender in determining the presidency. But then we have this reality that with a very small Black population, we're leading the nation, or at some point has led the nation in Black infant mortality rates, incarceration of Black individuals. The Race to Equity report that Mary alluded to earlier talks about this economic gap, this educational gap between Blacks and whites within Dane County. That's the county that surrounds Madison. That puts us in a category all by itself. For many years, maybe it's still true, outpacing every other county, not just county of its size or its demographic, but outpacing every other county in this country. So it's very important that our court advocates are really taking a look at this system in Wisconsin, because it's shaping Wisconsin's narrative. It's been said by some that this is probably the worst state to live in if you're Black. Now, people would want to say that's Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, but Wisconsin is being referred to as a place that's most difficult for Black people to thrive compared to any other state in the union.
That's right. And because of our numbers, because the Black population is smaller, it makes it even harder for white residents to see this, because it's really easy to stay in your little bubble surrounded by whiteness and think that's how the world works. It's easy to believe that Madison really is the best city to live in the country if you don't know the numbers. If we're the best city in the country, who is experiencing that? That's a really important question. Right. And if we don't break out the data by race, and for any metric that we're using for the health of our city or county or state, because the numbers are small, it's absolutely critical that anytime we quote statistics, we break them out by race.
Yes.
Because if we don't, the numbers are small enough for communities of color, they won't be reflected in the overall averages.
Right.
So I really encourage anybody that's sharing statistics, employment, housing, poverty, criminal justice, to always make sure that you look carefully at those details.
How many court cases in total has our team observed?
So in September of 2018, we held trainings to ask more people in the community to join in, and we had over 30 people come.
Wow.
And as of this morning, everybody submits their observations after they go to court, and they do one observation per hearing. And as of this morning, we had 337 submitted observations.
337 court observations. First of all, I need to commend you. That is phenomenal. That's fantastic work. And I don't know if you connect the dots as part of how I process things, but in the last history course, 4 Dane County circuit court judges attended a 9-week course, and I attribute that directly to the work that you're doing in their courts. And I saw that some of them came back to actually help to train the court observers, but 4 judges. I did what I call a ride along, but I sat with Judge Jill Karofsky, and she allowed me to sit, with her behind her bench. People stood up when I walked in with her, but she says, Alex, I think about that course every day. When I'm on the bench and I'm making decisions, I'm thinking about it every day. She even gave me examples. She's agreed to come in. I want to work to get the judges to come in to talk about their experiences. But she said, I think about the courses and I ask myself, what can I do to be a systemic changer? What can I do to bring about change? And so that's showing us that when people are educated, and then they're challenged to process it, and then they're further challenged to be mobilized and to be part of a change rather than just criticize. It's so easy just to criticize the judges. And what I appreciate about your work and your research, because it is research, Karen, these court reports, I'm telling you, that's why you wanted it. But what I love about what you're doing is you're not pitting one judge against another. You're not saying this judge is really great with people of color and this one's not. You're really just saying we're trying to observe things that are unique, things that are consistent, so that we have a better sense of how our system works. But because we live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is in the backyard of the university, and we love research, we make money off of research. It pumps money to our community. You're collecting data that becomes research. And Karen, does anyone else have this kind of data on court cases? Any non-governmental or regulatory body? Do we know if any other community-based organizations, has this kind of data on
I'm not
courses?
aware of any that do, and especially not with the systematic and qualitative observation that we're doing. People will pull data sets and do analysis of those kinds of numbers, but I'm not aware of other organizations that are doing this kind of
So that's
observing.
very powerful. So that helps me to understand why judges want to come, because again, just your presence is making people think, well, what do I know about systemic injustice, or what can I do? How do I move out of just being apathetic or ignorant to these realities? And what I found is the judges are pretty aware of what was going on, but they didn't know what they could do. Like, it's their job. They want to be fair. They want to protect society. But you have people observing what's going on. They're reading reports. After a while, they're thinking, something's wrong. These individuals can't be the only thing that's broken in my court. There have got to be other things that are broken or that are going awry. Talk to me about the next step. Because, initially you wanted to become court advocates, which means people in the community could call Nehemiah or refer to our Justified Anger initiative and actually ask, can people sit in on court cases? How far away do you think we are from becoming advocates? Because for me, if observing 337 cases is this powerful, I can only imagine what happens when our Justified Anger volunteers and partners begin to sit in court as advocates. Any sense, Betsey, about how far away we might be from actually taking on that role, and what it would take to, more people, resource, what it would take to really assume that role?
And to be fair, it really wasn't ourselves that decided that we weren't ready for this. One of the things we did when we were researching this court advocacy program was we went and talked to Man Up. Mm-hmm. And
that's the Nehemiah program for men who've come out of prison or jail, and they're reentering the community, and we offer a number of wraparound support services, housing, job support, job placement, and so that's what Betsey's referring to.
So we went and talked to them early on and said, we're thinking of doing this court advocacy program, and we understand that if a defendant has somebody sitting with them, that the outcome can be different. And what do you think about this? And a lot of them said, that would be great to have somebody, with me in these proceedings. But the main message we got was from Mr. Jerome, who said, to be an advocate, you have to be in relationship with somebody. So I'm not sure you're ready to do this. Mm-hmm. And so we stepped back and we said, we're going to start observing. Okay, we're just going to be there observing.
So you listened.
We did. We listened. And so then we
decided. And Mr. Jerome was formerly incarcerated himself. Yes. He's like probably one of the most renowned and respected reentry professionals in our community, probably our state. Great. Mm-hmm.
And so we also, as part of that, we went and we spoke with the public defender's office and asked them what they thought. And they just were blown away. They said, we would love to have people to refer our clients to, even to just get them to their proceeding, to explain something. So we knew where we were headed. And I think the mid-step is going to be something we're calling court navigators, where we're just sort of help with the logistics of getting people there, of explaining things. And then we're so that's probably going to happen, early next year, I would think?
Yeah, I think that's the aim.
Because we're doing a little bit more training this fall directly with Nehemiah's staff about how to be in relationship with people.
I love it.
That you're trying to help in a situation like that, because there are boundaries that we all need to be aware of. And, some of us are trained as social workers or sociologists or whatever, but other people don't understand about boundaries. So you need to learn. So we're moving kind of slowly, but we have
I like to think of it as being methodically.
Yes. We have already been asked by Nehemiah to attend a proceedings for one person that you were working with. And it wasn't me. It was, I believe, Mary was one of them.
There were 4 of us that attended. And to be witness, just to be witness. We didn't know this young fellow. We knew nothing. except what we read on CCAP going in. And we sat, we witnessed. I think there were probably us and 3 other people that knew him. I think we made a difference. It made a difference in the judge's deliberation and the outcome, which was the best case scenario there could have been for this young man.
Wow.
And yeah, it felt like it mattered that we were there.
You know, Mary, when we started off by talking, you just said you had a small enclave of friends you mainly connected with other parents or moms. And then you're sitting here telling me about the influence you're having on judges and the decisions of people's lives. What does that feel like? And I'm not trying to put you in a superhero category, because I know as advocates and as allies, you're wanting to avoid that. But as an influencer who's Black in this community, I do have the right to say, that's gutsy, and I really appreciate that. You don't have to say that. You can leave that for me to say, and I think that that's true for each of you and your team. But you almost sounded apologetic coming into this knowledge that I'm living in a white supremacist society. I've been focused on my own life, my daughter, my own world. But now you're sitting in court where you can go home at night and say, I didn't change someone's life, but I was a part of a process that made a huge difference in a judge's ruling. Because I heard about this scenario. And in the life of an individual. How does that feel to know that you're not just sitting on the sidelines, but you do have influence and you're taking advantage of it and you're doing something positive with it? What does that feel like?
I think it feels right. It feels, what does it feel like? I grew up in a time and in a liberal household where, and in a time of how history was taught of, well, what would you have done during the civil rights movement? You know, what would you, and I grew up thinking that, wondering about that question. And then now realizing that, you know, it's still here, it's now, and what am I doing? And so it's more, I feel like, am I doing enough? I don't go home and think, that was great. I go home and I think, am I doing enough?
I love it.
And where else can I show up? And again, I think that's what, if I were to encourage people, I would encourage them to, you know, you don't have to be, these two know so much more than I know, and I'm learning. But it matters that I'm showing up.
Yes, it does.
And I want other people to show up. And you asked about the aha, was there an aha case in court? And there was for me. I went in and saw an elderly gentleman. He was African-American man in his late 50s who repeat offender over and over and over, and finally ended up in Mendota for a year.
And that's a mental health hospital here in our community.
This man, he came in with a stack of papers and had clearly, once he had gotten himself stabilized, once they had helped him get stabilized, they didn't help him figure out what the next steps were. He had to pull it all together. He had to find himself housing. He had to find himself a job. He had to find himself a bus pass so that he could get, when he got discharged from Mendota, he could get to the pharmacy to get his meds. I mean, he had done all of this with absolutely no assistance. Wow. And that to me was like, okay, this system is so broken. It's so stacked. And in that, I want to acknowledge that in that, I saw bailiff kindness. Both the bailiff and his attorney, they turned to each other and they had a private little conversation. And then the attorney turned to the judge and said, we will make sure he gets his meds. We will make sure he gets to his job. You know, the system is... So I came away from that. I called Karen. And I was like, because I've been listening and learning. And this whole notion of going from observer to navigator to advocate seemed like a big stretch to me. And I wasn't sure I was up for this task. But okay, I'm here. I'm showing up.
Right.
And I said to Karen, I see a door into this. This man, just as somebody who could give him a ride.
Right.
would make all the difference in his being able to make it through the first 2 weeks and not end up back in jail.
Right.
Just a ride. I'm like, I can give people rides. It doesn't have to be, it can be the simplest of things that if we just show up and keep showing up.
I love that. No, I love that message. I'm running out of time. I'm enjoying this conversation, but Sandi, can I just pull you into one thing? Our CBS affiliate, Channel 3000 or Channel 3, did a story on the Court Observers program, and they interviewed you a bit. It was about a 5-minute piece. They're actually going to put a link in this podcast so that people can watch it. And if we could get a copy of the Court Observer form, if it's okay for that to be public, we'll link that as well. So people who are listening, who are connected with the criminal justice system, social workers, paralegals, etc., might want to look at some of this to get some ideas about how you might do this in your community. But first of all, your interview was just it was wonderful. But it was like this 5-minute piece that the news did, and it wasn't just like tonight nonprofit group serves as court advocates. Like they interviewed you and me and Dr. Reece, and probably about a month before it actually aired, so they got some good information. I'm sure your friends caught that. Did that spark interest, or people asking you questions, about Sandi, how, why? We didn't know you were doing this. I'm just curious what some of the reaction was to your friends and family when they saw that you were being interviewed about your participation in this Court Observer program.
Sure. You may overestimate the number of friends I have, but I did share it with some people who have been interested or heard that I was doing it, and it's been interesting. I've had some long conversations with some former colleagues and stuff who are just I think that they're interested to see, like Mary said, you can just show up. Like there's opportunities as everyday people to show up and do something, and it starts to break open this monolith of a system, which is, and so it's kind of cool because people will. I was talking to my former boss recently about it, and he was asking, and we were supposed to be talking about something else, but he's like, I could keep talking for 2 hours if you'd like, So it is interesting. People are starting to, I think they do pay attention, and it does open doors for people.
No, that's great. That's good. I just want you all to know, Karen, anything. Well, let me just give you just a moment, Betsey, just to say, we got people listening all over the country and the world, and they're troubled by what's going on, but they don't know how to take the next step. We keep hearing show up, show up, show up. Is there anything that you'd add to that for folks who are listening and they just think, you know what, I have some time on my hands and I could organize something like this. It takes time. But what would be your message to people? To be patient, to be consistent? Like, what would be your major...
The major message is go to Black leaders and find out what they think is needed.
Snap. No, that's... Yes. Because that doesn't happen. That seems simple, but it does not happen.
You can't just come up with things on your own. You need to know how it fits in the big picture, and you need to do what people who are most affected feel needs to be done.
I love it. If people who are listening to this podcast email or contact our office and want to talk to someone who's part of the Court Advocacy Court Navigators Program, would you or someone on your team be willing to maybe share an email with them to just help coach them in that process?
Most certainly.
So we'll put a link on that as well. Dr. Reece, what's the best email for that? Is it in
justifiedanger@nehemiah.org?
Okay, and we'll put a link for that. So if you're in a community and you want to do something and you're realizing that there's great disparity and you want to do more than just lament the fact that that's true and you want to do something, contact us. That link will be here as well. Well, I told you, sit back, be ready. What I really love about this work is that when we consider civil rights, a few figures come to mind. Almost all of them are Black and almost all of them are male. But we're sitting here talking with 4 white women who are advocates, who want to do something about their community, and they're helping us to realize that a movement towards equality and fairness requires everyone to get involved. And so there are great examples that you don't have to have a legal background. You don't have to be an orator like Martin Luther King Jr., or you don't have to be a writer or a journalist like Ida B. Wells. You can just be an everyday citizen who has an everyday heart and realizes this is not fair. I think what's happened in our country is that people knew things were wrong, but they were never moved to action. That was someone else's problem. It was someone else's problem and someone else's duty to address it and fix it. And I appreciate the fact that people in our community are responding to the fact that this may be one of the worst places in the nation for Black people to live, but people are collectively saying not on our watch. I'm saying not on my watch. You're saying not on your watch. And this is a great example of what happens when everyday people come together and just say, let's make a difference. So you don't have to worry about being a hero or a superhero. Just be a concerned citizen and find what it is you can do. I just finished a preaching series called What's That in Your Hand? What's your ability? What are you able to do? And I guarantee you it's sufficient for change. And you've just met some individuals, outstanding individuals, who are doing extraordinary things. I mean, ordinary folks doing extraordinary things because they're looking out for the good of other folks. Because ultimately, and I've heard them talk, and I know what we aim to offer people through our Justified Anger work and our Nehemiah organization is that when we realize that we're all connected and that we cannot become our best until everyone else has a fair shot at it, we truly believe that. And so I appreciate that you did not talk from a position of pitying folks or thinking, well, they probably don't know what they really need, so let's just go put this together for these ex-cons. You didn't take these are formerly incarcerated folks. They're part of our community. They are not their number that was given to them at the Department of Corrections. They're more than that. These are individuals, and they deserve dignity and they deserve fairness. And we all become better when we do our part. So thank you all so much for being a guest on here. This has been absolutely delightful. And thank you for caring about our community and our individuals and doing more than just talking about it, but actually getting into courts. I appreciate you and really respect the time that you take and respect you for really for acting like responsible citizens and working with individuals to bring about great systemic change. So have a great day. But thank you again for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Corey Saffold and Marcus Fleming for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, my engineer, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and our intro and outro are recorded by Cynthia Woodland. And a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.